What a pleasure to have a professor, someone that is actually probably close to being like Indiana Jones in South Africa. I don't know if you've got the fedora and the whip, but we're joined by Professor Jonah Choiniere, and he's going to be telling us all about the field of paleontology and how amazing to have a discovery in our backyard, and then also talk about Jurassic Park. Welcome, Jonah.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
So I'm just going to dive straight in. What inspired you to pursue paleontology? And you are actually more of a specialist in paleobiology. So what kind of led you to that? And what is it that you actually do?
So that's it's kind of I actually have a cheeky answer to this, is that I didn't set out to be a paleontologist. I'm a failed archaeologist, I guess, is what I would say. So when I went to university, I thought, I really want to study the origins of human culture and, get at how civilizations began and really follow that traditional Indiana Jones sort of track. And
so
when I started doing that,
I was more online than I thought.
You were spot on. And it turns out it's not all whips and fedoras. A lot of it is extremely boring office compliance work. And so I did a summer of archaeology work, and I just said to myself, no way, I can't do this. At that time, I was kind of finishing university, and I had some experience in geology and some experience in archaeology, and I sort of doubled down on the geology and left with a degree in archaeology and a separate degree in geology. And then I quit school. I said, I've had enough of this. I've worked so hard. And I took a job in the East Coast of the US. I managed an urban wildlife sanctuary. I did children's education, and all the while feeling like, what am I going to do with my life? And so at some point it was like, all right, if I don't go back to school now, there's no way I'm ever going to go back to school. And so I thought, well, what do my skills enable me to do? And the geology side of things enabled me to go a little bit deeper in time, to start looking not just at the origins of humans, but the origins of life on Earth itself. And so I applied to paleontology programs, and I got soundly rejected from all of them.
Oh, wow.
But I got in on the waiting list at a place called George Washington University. It's in DC, right next to the White House, basically. And they took a chance on me. And when I got there, they said, well, would you like to go dig for dinosaurs in China for your project? And I said, yes, of course. Like, who would say no to that? And that set me on the road to doing dinosaur paleontology, and then, broadening out eventually in my career to try to study not just the dinosaur species, but also like what type of world did they live in? How do they interact with each other? What could they do? What couldn't they do? And that's where the paleobiology comes into it.
Sure.
So I've already forgotten the second half of your question. Maybe you can remind me.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, just before that, do you want to go and study dinosaurs in China? I mean, that just sounds like once in a lifetime kind of a question. So you had to. But yeah, the second part of it was what do you do? Like, what is it? What's the kind of average day or week for you?
It's amazing because you think, hey, this guy must be out in the dirt digging all the time. And the reality of it is we get about 5 weeks of field work in a year, if we're lucky. Sure. So we spend 50 weeks almost under fluorescent lights, writing papers, actually preparing the fossils, scanning stuff on our CT scanner. And that justifies like us going and spending a little tiny bit of time in the field digging up new stuff. So my day is, I'm a university professor, so I have the usual professorial duties of teaching and duty of care to the postgraduate students that I supervise. We also have a research collection at WITS that has thousands of specimens, so I have some duty of care to make sure things are properly cataloged and that our technical staff are conserving them so they'll be here 100 years from now for study. And then I spend a lot of my time begging other people for money to go out in the field, trying to get grants from international funders, of course. And then what time I have left is really a mixture of sort of looking at fossils, comparing them to things in museums worldwide, and then scanning them with our CT scanner, trying to figure out what the internal structure is, and then combining all those sort of different data points into consistent stories and scientific papers about how these animals live.
Yeah, I think it's quite important for people to kind of get the whole story, because I think it sometimes gets glamorized. The Indiana Jones idea of you're out in the field sort of punching Nazis, most of the day or something. But, obviously there is the paperwork and the admin and the real science when it comes down to it. So that's really like quite interesting. And how did you find yourself at Wits University specifically? I mean, you've traveled to China, you've kind of been around the world, and has the transition been quite easy with South Africa, just kind of immersing yourself?
I just want to tell you that I've actually never punched anyone, Nazi or otherwise, in the field, to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, the move to Wits. So I'm an American. I grew up on the East Coast of the U.S. I did all my schooling and education on the East Coast, and in fact, like many Americans, I never really traveled outside of my home state until I was in my 20s, and I took just a random trip to Spain just after September 11th, and I found like, wow, this is amazing. Why don't I travel more often? It just really opened my eyes to international experiences. So that work in China. So I worked in China for my PhD in a variety of places, and then I moved to New York and did postdoctoral research. And there I got to drive across Mongolia 3 summers in a row and look for fossils at like these famous places that Roy Chapman Andrews had been. And in the course of that research, I had to come to South Africa to look at a couple of very, very important, but very small dinosaurs that had been discovered here near Grahamstown, which is now Makanda.
Oh, yeah.
And when I came to South Africa the first time, I mean, we flew into Joburg. It was at night, caught a plane to Port Elizabeth, drove to Grahamstown. Never saw any of the country except Grahamstown and a little tiny bit of the Karoo nearby. But I couldn't believe it. I mean, you grow up in the US and you hear these things about South Africa, what a dangerous place it is. And it didn't jibe with my experience. I mean, we ate so well and people are so welcoming, and obviously the Karoo landscape is so beautiful. And I told the scientists I was working with in Grahamstown, I said, if a job ever comes up, will you let me know? I'd love to have this as an international experience, something a little deeper. And then in 2012 a job came up, and the rest is history. I took this job at Wits. I'd never been to Joburg before. I convinced my wife to move with me. And, our friends from the US are saying things like, oh, do you have to shower with a bucket, or the elephant's going to be like eating your lawn, and, a lot of kind of ignorant stuff. But in truth, like, I didn't know. I'd never been to Joburg before. And I was moving from New York City. So the initial kind of culture shock, stepping off that plane and being like, this is home now, New York and Johannesburg are really nothing alike. So it took some getting used to. I mean, everything's different if you're an American. Like, the units of measurement are different. Driving on the other side of the road, the names of basically all the fruits and vegetables are different. It's a really fundamental life change. And I've been here 8 years, and I only feel like now I'm just settling in. Like, I've finally gone a little bit native.
Yeah,
and
yeah. I mean, it's like moving to another planet. I mean, South Africa is that kind of different. Even the climate sort of is a lot different. And you said something about Grahamstown. I was there for quite a while, and if that was your first experience, then it was just going to get bigger, because I mean, that's such a small town place. 51 churches, that kind of runs on the schools alone. And is that the farm out there in Grahamstown? That there's a farm that's sort of got quite a lot of discoveries credited to it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, in fact, the whole Grahamstown area, basically from what's the name of from Addo Elephant Park. I mean, that's a little bit outside of town. Obviously, it's an hour and a half drive or so. But there, all the way to the coast, is just jam-packed with fossils. Everything you look at has a fossil in it. And
Sure.
There's like some of the earliest, vertebrates to step out of the sea, just outside of Grahamstown on the side of the road. The earliest lampreys on Earth, just outside of Grahamstown on the side of the road. The first dinosaurs in South Africa discovered on a game farm halfway to Port Elizabeth. Like, is just so rich. It's amazing. And most people just drive by it and they have no idea, you know, there's no
Yeah.
road sign that says like, you know, first vertebrate or first tetrapod discovered here.
I think they might be dodging potholes, and you know, I know the road from Port Alfred to Grahamstown, and even PE to Kenton on Sea, and that area is quite interesting. But yeah, it is fascinating, and you know, that's the kind of stuff that people really need to hear about. I mean, like, no one considers that there could actually be a very serious, like, you know, tour, like along that Sunshine Coast there, that could even lead to like better tourism. Like, you know, they aren't capitalizing that stuff. It's so unspoiled there and beautiful actually in its own right, that it just seems like such a waste not to be doing stuff about it. And speaking of that, you know, South Africa is known as the cradle of humankind. You know, you've kind of answered this question already. I mean, it is really a gold mine when it comes to this kind of research. But maybe if you could compare it with, you know, the rest of the world, like just how much of a finder's place is South Africa?
I mean, I think there's a couple of really interesting statistics. And the first one is a little, like about 2/3 of South Africa's land area has fossils on it, which means like on average, you have fossils in your backyard, no matter where you live in South Africa. So, I mean, there's almost nowhere you could go in South Africa where you wouldn't be either standing on top of fossils or like 10-minute drive away from finding fossils. And that's incredible. I mean, I don't think there's anywhere on Earth like that. The other cool thing is like, if you drive from Johannesburg, and we've got like the Cradle of Humankind, we've got a very recent history of our species, and you drive all the way back to Cape Town on the N1, you're in a time machine, even if you didn't know that. You're driving through rocks that progressively get older and older and older. They get deeper in Earth's history. And so first you begin to find like the Pleistocene animals that lived here in the last ice ages. Then you begin to find dinosaurs. Then you begin to find things that came before dinosaurs, the origins of mammals. Then you begin to find like ancient fish. And then you begin to find ancient plants and some of the first plants to come out of the water. And all that's like on that N1 route. It's essentially a country that preserves nearly 400 million years of the evolution of life on Earth. And yeah, it's just stunning. So no, I mean, there's just nowhere on Earth that does that in such a concerted way. And it's such a pleasure to take students here and teach them this. I mean, if you get a person who's like, I want to study the origin of life on Earth, then you say, let's just take a drive, or come down to our research collection. You know, there's 140 years of people collecting fossils, and we have them, and they reflect all those time periods.
Sure. Yeah, it's just kind of, yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of gobsmacked that, you know, it doesn't get spoken about more and kind of visited more in the media. Yeah, so hopefully this is going to be the turning point, because I know that I'm hoping that a lot of people are going to watch this interview, realize just how much potential our country has, and actually start speaking about this and celebrating it actually. So I'm not too sure what you would maybe consider your crowning moment, but I'm sure that this probably is one of the definite highlights in your career. You were involved in the discovery of Ledumahati Mafube, and how did this come about? Can you tell us the story?
Yeah, I probably should start by telling you what it is.
Yes, that's a good.
It might make it interesting.
That is a good point. Yeah.
So Ledumahati is it's a giant dinosaur. It's a dinosaur that weighed 12 tons, and it lived about 200 million years ago in the northern, sort of northeastern Free State, just near Clarence, which is a lovely place to go, and loaded with dinosaurs too. And I want to tell you more about Clarence in a bit. So Ledumahati is it's the size of 2 full-grown large male African elephants. I mean, this animal is enormous,
Sure.
and it's the largest thing ever to have evolved on Earth at the time it lived. So it's really significant. It's a type of dinosaur called a sauropodomorph. It's related to the classic tiny head, long neck, big fat body, walk on all 4 limbs things. And when you watch Jurassic Park, you'll remember the scene with the brachiosaur coming up into the trees and the kids are hiding there. That's Ledumahati's descendant. It's part of the same family. But the name Ledumahati means the giant thunder at dawn. Mafubi means dawn. And it's sort of the dawn of the giant dinosaur period. That's what we thought would be an appropriate name for this animal.
Sure.
So the discovery of this thing, I mean, my part is actually relatively small. The bones were some of the bones were first discovered in the early 90s by a guy named James Kitching, who's a professor at Wits and probably the best fossil finder that the world has ever seen. I mean, this guy, they took him to Antarctica, and they were flying over some rocks in a helicopter, and he famously said, "Put me down there, I bet you there's fossils there." Jumped out of the helicopter, boom, fossil right away. I mean, you know, he was just a phenom, like a legend. And so Kitching was walking on the edge of the Little Caledon River, just on the border with Lesotho, but on the South African side, doing some survey work, and he found these giant dinosaur bones. And he didn't even like dinosaurs. That's the funny thing about Kitching. So he just put them on a shelf. He said, "It's boring." The guy who had my job before me was going through the collections one day and famously said, holy crap, this is a giant dinosaur. So he went back to that site, pulled a few more bones out, and he handed the project off to me. When he left, he moved to Australia, and he said, "Look, there's this cool thing. You should definitely pursue it." So we went for about 3 years and collected there, finally digging out like the half of the thigh bone, which is, the thigh bone's like is big around as my waist. It's just enormous. We had to tunnel into the side of a cliff to get this thing out. And so we finally got all the pieces back in the lab and got them assembled and then figured out what it was. So we found out it was a new species. And then one of the interesting things about this animal is, like, we know nothing about extinct animals, right? Like, you tell me, "Whoa, well, what did Ledumahati eat?" I don't know. Probably plants. How did it walk? I don't really know. Could it run? No, I don't know. Did it walk on 2 legs or 4? Like that sort of stuff. We don't have paleo binoculars, right? You literally cannot make these natural history observations. So we figured, this animal weighs 12 tons. Like, it's probably got to have figured out some way to walk on 4 legs. There's just so much body mass to support if it were walking on 2 legs, like its older relatives. And so we went around the world looking at skeletons of animals that walk on 2 and 4 legs and making some comparisons of various measurements. And we're able to use that, those measurements in a statistical framework to show that Ledumahati certainly was a quadruped. It definitely walked on all 4 legs, and also to make some inferences about how do you evolve the ability to walk on all 4 legs. It turns out it evolves a lot of times in sauropods. They take forever to kind of get it right in an evolutionary sense. And so my contribution to the paper was sort of like the mop-up work of the excavation, and then a little bit of statistics to make some inferences about, what its lifestyle would have been.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing how it can actually kind of, it's almost like a generational sort of building block kind of operation. But yeah, I mean, 2018 when it sort of was officially kind of recognized? Yeah. Is that when it was named as well?
That's right. So it took let's see, 93, 7 years. Yeah, it took 25 years to get that thing published from the time it was first found.
Well, I know that some screenplays take like about 10, 20 years to get made into films. So yeah, it's all relative, I suppose. And it's been described as an evolutionary experiment. Why would they say that?
I'm going to digress just a little bit. Let me talk in circles around this and then come back to the question. But, we often think of evolution in a very casual way of being like, oh, the slow progression towards perfection, right? Like birds started off flying a little bit and then got better at it, and now they're really good at flying, that kind of thing. And that doesn't often jibe with our observations of fossils and the observations of reality on the ground. And what we find is that things like flight, for example, they evolved several times, even on the way to birds independently. And like one little group will evolve flight, but they'll be crap at it. And that group will go extinct. But then another group will evolve flight and they'll be maybe a little bit better at it and they live for a bit longer and go extinct. And so, in the case of birds, we know that flight probably evolved at least twice before birds like cracked it and then go on to explosively, radiate and blanket the earth with their awesome flight ability. And it's exactly the same case with Ledumahati. So these sauropods are figuring out how to be big in an evolutionary sense. And that involves things like getting a long neck, getting a huge digestive tract, walking on all four limbs to support their big swinging gut and that kind of thing. And they don't crack all those like solutions together. It's like one group evolves this, but then they go extinct. The next group kind of picks up where they left off and evolves a few more, a few more of those perfections required for giant body size. And so, Ledumahati's group, they're not true sauropods. They're like what we call the sister group. They're like an evolutionary dead end, as people like to say. And so they figure out a bunch of good stuff about being a sauropod, like they evolve really big body size and they evolve the ability to walk on four limbs. But it looks like they didn't figure out how to make a long neck very well. And their locomotion might have been a bit more awkward. It might have been kind of sprawling. And so that was their experiment with being giant quadrupedal animals. And ultimately that doesn't lead anywhere. But their relatives, their cousins, take that ball and they run with it. And then they become very, very successful finally. They crack the problem and then go on to cover the earth.
Sure. Okay. Obviously, you've said that it took like 25 years for the findings to kind of breach, I suppose. So, what kind of impact has it had worldwide, would you say? I mean, when something like this comes about and it is breaking international news, like what impact does it have in maybe the scientific community?
Yeah, I think in the scientific community, it's quite easy to measure that impact. So we look at the number of other papers that have cited that paper, that have used that paper as a basis for their research. And Ledumahati, that paper's done very, very well. It's been cited by nearly 40 different studies, and it only came out 2 years ago. That's a very good, rate of sort of pollinating other works. There was also, because of the work we did on locomotion and posture in that paper, this year at the Vertebrate Paleontology Annual Meeting, which is like the big paleo fest for scientists each year, there was a whole, almost a symposium, if you will, on studying locomotion using some of the methods we invented for that paper.
Okay.
So
I hope you were invited. I hope you're invited to that one. They can't just use your stuff. Eh?
No, well, I gave a talk about another really interesting South African site there, which I hope I can tell you about a little later in the interview. But so the scientific impact of Ledumahati has been really good. Actually, I've been really pleased and very proud of that. And then I think the popular culture impact is lagging behind a bit. One of the things is animals like Ledumahati, we need the help of science communicators, and we need, particularly in South Africa, people translating this into other languages and making multimedia presentations. So like, I talked about it on the radio and on 702, and that was well received. But there's, I didn't get it onto SABC television or something. And I'm hoping, and there's so many interesting things coming out of our research lab at WITS anyway. I'm hoping that word will grow, and eventually when we write a big paper like this, it'll be quite a broadband media presentation for the average person who's scientifically keen, but isn't going to go and cite the original scientific work.
Yeah, you definitely need the sort of the graphic and the sort of more interactive elements to really kind of sell that, because it's right. When you're just looking at the bones, it's interesting to the average viewer for about a couple of minutes, and then they kind of need more. They need more color. They need these things to have flesh on them and to be walking around and making noises. Yeah. So I totally understand that. And speaking of the sort of pop culture side of things, some of the biggest Hollywood film franchises have obviously been about archaeology and paleontology. I mean, this is really Steven Spielberg's playground. What do you think makes these sciences so appealing?
Well, I mean, it's good to have someone like Spielberg on your side, of course, right? The guy can tell a story.
Yeah.
And the soundtracks are often catchy too. But the thing about those two disciplines is they're so exploration based. We go out and every time we go out in the field, we find monsters. And the cool thing about our monsters is they're real. And I mean, I just think that's really gripping, right? And legitimately, although I didn't carry a whip in Mongolia or wear a fedora.
Yeah.
When you're driving across the Gobi Desert, or you're driving out into the, through the Karoo here, you're on your own. It's an adventure, and you go, 1,000 kilometers away from your home in a truck, and you hunker down in the dirt, and all of a sudden you find this beautiful skull of an extinct animal that no one's ever seen before. I mean, that's that kind of stuff. When you popularize it, it just makes for gripping, gripping stories. So I think it's that exploration component.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It's also that idea of the diligence and the sort of build up to this discovery, because that's such a payoff to all the hard work and, all the preparation that goes into it. It's kind of like there's that life lesson and that theme kind of carrying through it. So yeah, and Spielberg also loves aliens. So I think anything that's otherworldly to him, he's in the business of illusions and bringing things that we actually wish we could bring to life. I suppose that was the whole idea behind Jurassic Park, and what a great job he did with that. Speaking of Jurassic Park, what impressed you most about it, and what bothered you most about watching it? I don't know if you've seen it recently, but
I haven't seen it recently. I mean, I watched the movie in the theater with my dad when I was like 14. And I grew up like in a tiny town, and so seeing a movie was a huge deal. And before that, I think I'd seen like a handful. Like I saw E.T. in the theater when I was 5 or 6 or something like that. And so, I mean, first thing, like Jurassic Park was, I mean, it's got classic Spielbergian like puppets and things like that, but they're so well done, and the special effects for that time, I mean, they just seemed incredible to me. And really, seeing a movie like that on the big screen, where dinosaurs convey this awesome sense of scale, right? There's something so impressive about seeing just giant stuff. And so you're seeing these giant dinosaurs portrayed, making their grumbling, rumbling sounds, and they're up on a big screen. So they're actually like kind of life size. I mean, it was just stunning. I absolutely love that movie from the first, like from the opening credits, it perpetuates some negative stereotypes about our discipline, about women in paleontology too. I think what's her name, Laura Dern's like wearing like a tied up shirt or something. It's just ridiculous, like right?
Pre-Tomb Raider kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm not that racy by today's standards, but still, like that's not I have run a mostly female team, and I promise you, none of them would tie up their shirt in the field. Those girls are and young women are super tough. They wouldn't put up with that stuff. There's that scene where Dr. Grant like has an interaction with a kid at the dig site, and he really scares the daylights out of this kid with the raptor claw. That is also like not how I go about my operation, right? Like when we have a lot of kids at our dig sites, particularly ones which are in close to populated areas, we welcome them in and like bring them in and say, this is what we're doing, and try to get these people excited so that they're applying to do their honors with us at WITS 10 years from now or 15 years from now.
Yeah, not giving them like traumatic experiences they're going to be talking to their therapists a lot about in a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think this dinosaur craze has converted many fans? Speaking of that whole family dynamic of you welcoming people in, has it sort of, do you think it's led to a lot of people to study paleontology specifically? Or is that something that people have kind of just kind of navigated towards after just finding their way?
I think it's part of like a kind of a whole group of factors that has led to what we're calling, a friend of mine calls this the golden age of paleontology. We've got the analytical tools now, statistical techniques, CT scanners. We've got some name recognition, like people think paleontologists are real scientists now, which they didn't used to. And so, they let our papers in good journals, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of people doing the discipline, right? There's really good scientists that have been trained now for a long time who are coming of age, themselves are training awesome students. And so the level of inquiry has gone from like down here to over my head. And when you go to scientific meetings now, it's like, holy smokes, these kids are doing stuff that It's like mind blowing. I would never have been able to do that when I was a PhD student or something. So there is like a golden age of paleontology. And I do think that media has driven some of that, particularly things like Jurassic Park and Dinosaur Train. And, you know, they're legitimizing the discipline, that's a big thing, right? Like the PR of your discipline that's an important thing. And they're also telling people that dinosaurs aren't just old dusty bones in a museum. Like these were real things that once lived on Earth, and we can discover things about their real lives. And I think when you flesh something out and turn it into a real animal about which we can make observations, it's just so much more compelling to study. And now most of my students, you know, they would combine like a dinosaur study with a study of living animals. And there's some sort of integration between we say the present is the key to the past. I do think that portraying dinosaurs as fleshed out beings, it's really promoted that kind of study. So I guess I'll stop there. So I think it's a huge change.
Yeah, I suppose it's just about keeping it relevant and in front of mind, I suppose, all the time as well. That's what the pop culture side of things has done for it. You wanted to talk about another discovery or another earlier?
Yeah, I want to tell you just a few things, particularly for the South African audience. You know, I think there's some things that we need to plug, but also it's just fun to talk about. So a fascinating thing is that in Golden Gate Highlands National Park, which is my favorite national park because it has the most dinosaurs per square meter of land in it. But in Golden Gate, next year, they're opening a dinosaur interpretive center called the Kodomodomo Interpretive Center. And that center is built around this incredible story of nesting dinosaurs in the park. So right on the edge of the road in Golden Gate, there are dinosaur eggs. They're literally sticking out of the cliffs. And it turns out for at least something like 100,000 years, a South African dinosaur called Massaspondylus was returning there to lay eggs and to rear its babies. And so we have eggs, we have fossil eggs with embryos still inside them. We have, fossils of the grown-up dinosaurs and all the other things in that ecosystem that were preying on the eggs or were running around in the nest area, like little crocodiles the size of chihuahuas, small mammals that look like shrews, but they're among the first mammals. So the place is so rich. And the museum tells the story of the discovery of those eggs and the scientific story of why they're important. And then includes like a final viewing platform where you can actually view that dig site. And hopefully we'll be active in the park for years and years, digging up more eggs and also finding more stuff. So, you know, that's something to kind of watch this space. With COVID, who knows, but it should open in 2021. If not, it'd be early 2022.
That's Golden Gate by San Francisco.
No, Golden Gate by Clarence.
Oh,
South
wow.
Africa.
Okay, that's good to know. I kind of wasn't sure what we were talking about.
I was about
to say that The Rock would make a perfect place for Jurassic Park.
Yeah. No, 3 hours from Joburg. You know, it's a quick drive. It's got a brewery in town. Like it's just perfect. And
Clarence is also a great place just to visit, just because it's so picturesque.
Totally.
And just to know that it's beautiful on top and below. I mean, what more can you ask for?
And that's where Ledumahati was discovered, just outside of Golden Gate, sort of 20 minutes down the road from Clarence into the next town.
And is that like a documented site? I mean, surely the tourism board should have like brown signs pointing towards where it was found.
So they've got a sign there. It was put up by the person who owns the bed and breakfast that's at the end of this long dirt road. And so there is a little bit of stuff, but you'd have to know. I mean, you have to drive 4 kilometers down an unmarked road before you see the sign.
Yeah. So once again,
that's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
We've got a new dig site. It was discovered by a shepherd right on the border of Lesotho and way out there. I mean, this is the closest sort of hotspot is a town called Lady Grey, which was fashionable for vacations in the 1870s or something like that.
And you know what? It was the setting for a film called Five Fingers for Marseille, which is an African Western. And those massive mountains in the backdrop are just so epic. And so it's kind of interesting, the sort of filmic kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, those mountains are full of dinosaurs, it turns out. They're like chock full of dinosaurs. And people were collecting there in the 1840s. There's this crazy old hermit guy whose name was Hoha Brown, and he worked in Aliwal North, like on the train switch or something like this. And he like spent all of his free time going out and collecting fossils out in the veldt. And so he found like all kinds of really, really awesome South African stuff. And we're really following in his footsteps. But this, so if you go drive towards those hills from Lady Grey about an hour past Stark Strait and get up to very close to the Telly Bridge crossing into Lesotho, a shepherd up there stumbled across some bones. And there's this incredibly long, complicated story. It took like 2 years for a sample of the bones to get to me at Wits. And I saw them and I said, oh, these are pretty cool. And we visited this guy. And it turns out he's part of this whole community, really interesting, like educated people, but living in rural, nowhere. And there's dinosaur bones everywhere there, like falling out of the sides of erosional gullies on the side of the road. There's like probably the most significant site we've ever discovered. And so this is turning into a huge project now. I mean, it's like literally hectares and hectares of dinosaur skeletons. So we've just got some of the first stuff back. And those guys want to develop the dinosaur tourism route that goes from Lady Grey, well, maybe from Clarence one day, all around the border of Lesotho up to Lady Grey, and then up to this village, Komeha, on the Lesotho border.
The way that you talk about, people just kind of like having a walk and discovering stuff, I mean, it just shows you just how rich it is there in terms of discovery. But it also reminds me of Stonehenge at a time when they used to let people take a chip off the actual stone as a memento and then just take it home. They obviously had to stop doing that. I mean, you actually want something to see when you get there. But I just was thinking about that, like almost having a public appeal to say, look, if you are doing some kind of hobby kind of study, tell us about it. If you find something, like, don't just kind of keep it as a keepsake for the fireplace or something. Yeah.
The South African fossil protection laws are very strong, and they're quite good. They're relatively progressive, especially by international standards. So at least the weight of the law is behind us. But you're right. I mean, I think by being transparent about this and telling people this is what these are worth, they're so scientifically important, and making it a point of pride for South Africans. I hope people will do the right thing when they do find something and just give me a call. Basically farmers and people who are out hiking, they're on the ground all the time. And I only get 5 weeks a year. So almost all of our discoveries now are coming from the tip line. Hey, I found this. Can you check it out?
Is there a tip line? Is it like?
No, I should establish one, right?
Yeah, because like
put my phone number up on the bottom of the screen here. Flashing. And
I was just about to say, otherwise, like, I mean, no one's really afraid of the fossil police, no one's going to be like raided for fossils. That would be, yeah. But
there's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's been wonderful chatting to you and just getting behind the scenes on everything paleontology, Jurassic Park. And I need to say this very carefully, Ledumahati Mufube, which I think should become more of a household name across South Africa. Hopefully we can help get it there. Yeah. Thank you, Jonah.
Well, thanks for having me. What a pleasure.